36. Table, cover yourself, gold donkey, and stick out of the bag. Once upon a time, there was a tailor who had 3 sons and only 1 goat. Since the goat nourished them all with its milk, it was essential to feed her well and lead her out to pasture every day. The sons took turns doing this. One day, the eldest took her to the churchyard where the finest herbs grew, allowing her to eat and frolic there. In the evening, when it was time to go home, he asked, "Goat, are you full?" The goat answered, "I am so full, I do not want a leaf. Meh! Meh!" "So come home," said the boy, took her by the rope, led her into the stable, and tied her up. "Now," said the old tailor, "has the goat had its proper feed?" "Oh," answered the son, "she is so full, she does not want a leaf." But the father wanted to see for himself, went down to the stable, stroked the dear animal, and asked, "Goat, are you full too?" The goat replied, "What should I be full of? I only hopped over the little graves and found not a single leaf. Meh! Meh!" "What must I hear?" cried the tailor, ran up and said to the boy, "Oh, you liar, you said the goat was full and you let her starve?" In his anger, he took the yardstick from the wall and drove him out with blows. The next day it was the turn of the second son, who chose a spot at the garden hedge where only good herbs grew, and the goat ate them clean. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, are you full?" The goat answered, "I am so full, I do not want a leaf. Meh! Meh!" "So come home," said the boy, brought her home, and tied her up in the stable. "Now," said the old tailor, "has the goat had its proper feed?" "Oh," answered the son, "she is so full, she does not want a leaf." The tailor did not want to rely on that, went down to the stable and asked, "Goat, are you full too?" The goat replied, "What should I be full of? I only hopped over the little graves and found not a single leaf. Meh! Meh!" "The godless villain!" cried the tailor, "to let such a pious animal starve." He ran up and drove the boy out of the house with the yardstick. Now it was the third son's turn, who wanted to do his duty well, chose bushes with the finest leaves, and let the goat eat from them. In the evening, when he wanted to go home, he asked, "Goat, are you full too?" The goat answered, "I am so full, I do not want a leaf. Meh meh." "So come home," said the boy, led her into the stable, and tied her up. "Now," said the old tailor, "has the goat had its proper feed?" "Oh," answered the son, "she is so full, she does not want a leaf." The tailor did not trust that, went down and asked, "Goat, are you full too?" The wicked animal replied, "What should I be full of? I only hopped over the little graves and found not a single leaf. Meh, meh." "Oh, the brood of liars," cried the tailor, "one as godless and forgetful of duty as the other. You shall not make a fool of me any longer." And in his rage, he jumped up and thrashed the poor boy out of the house with the yardstick. Now the old tailor was alone with his goat. The next morning he went down to the stable, caressed the goat, and said, "Come, my dear little animal, I will lead you to pasture myself." He took her by the rope and brought her to green hedges, under shrubs, and whatever else goats like to eat. "There you can satisfy yourself to your heart's content," he said to her, and let her graze until evening. Then he asked, "Goat, are you full?" She answered, "I am so full, I do not want a leaf. Meh!" "So come home," said the tailor, led her into the stable, and tied her up. When he walked away, he turned around once more and said, "Now you are surely full." But the goat did not make it easy for him and called out, "How should I be full? I only hopped over the little graves and found not a single leaf. Meh! Meh!" When the tailor heard this, he paused and realized that he had unjustly cast out his 3 sons. "Wait," he cried, "you ungrateful creature. To drive you away is not enough. I will mark you so that you cannot show yourself among respectable tailors again." In a rush, he leaped up, fetched his beard scissors, lathered the goat's head, and shaved it as smooth as his own flat hand. And since the yardstick would have been too honorable, he grabbed the whip and lashed her so hard that she ran off in mighty leaps. As the tailor sat all alone in his house, he fell into great sadness and wished he had his sons back, but no one knew where they had gone. The eldest had apprenticed with a carpenter, where he learned diligently and tirelessly. When his time came to wander, the master gifted him a small table that had no special appearance and was made of ordinary wood. But it had a good property. When placed down and commanded, "Table, set yourself," the good table was instantly covered with a clean cloth, and there stood a plate, knife, and fork beside it, with bowls of stewed and roasted dishes as much as they could hold, and a large glass of red wine that made the heart rejoice. The young journeyman thought, "With this, you have enough for your lifetime," traveled cheerfully through the world, and did not care whether an inn was good or bad, or if there was anything to find in it or not. If he pleased, he did not enter at all. Instead, in the field, in the forest, on a meadow where he fancied, he took his little table from his back, set it before him, and said, "Set yourself," and everything his heart desired was there. Finally, it occurred to him that he wanted to return to his father. His anger would have subsided, and he would gladly take him back with the table that set itself. It so happened that on his way home in the evening, he came to an inn full of guests. They welcomed him and invited him to sit with them and eat, otherwise he would hardly get anything. "No," replied the carpenter, "I won't take these few bites from your mouths. Rather, you shall be my guests." They laughed and thought he was joking with them. But he placed his wooden table in the middle of the room and said, "Table, set yourself." Instantly, it was filled with food as good as the host could not have brought, and the scent delighted the guests. "Help yourselves, dear friends," said the carpenter, and the guests, seeing how it was meant, did not need to be asked twice, gathered around, drew their knives, and bravely helped themselves. What amazed them the most was that when a dish was emptied, a full one appeared in its place on its own. The host stood in a corner and watched. He did not know what to say, but thought, "I could certainly use such a cook in my inn." The carpenter and his company were cheerful until late at night. Finally, they went to sleep, and the young journeyman went to bed and placed his self-setting table against the wall. But the thoughts did not leave the innkeeper. He remembered an old table in his junk room that looked exactly like it. He quietly brought it out and exchanged it with the self-setting table. The next morning, the carpenter paid his lodging, packed up his table, never thinking it could be a fake, and went on his way. At noon, he arrived at his father's, who received him with great joy. "Well, my dear son, what have you learned?" he asked. "Father, I have become a carpenter." "A good trade," replied the old man. "But what have you brought back from your travels?" "Father, the best thing I have brought back is the table." The tailor examined it from all sides and said, "You have not made a masterpiece of this. It's an old and poor table." "But it's a self-setting table," replied the son. "When I place it down and tell it to set itself, everything appears on it. The finest dishes and a wine that delights the heart. Invite all relatives and friends. They shall feast and refresh themselves, for the table will satisfy them all." When the company was gathered, he placed his table in the middle of the room and said, "Table, set yourself." But the table did not move and remained as empty as any other table that does not understand language. The poor journeyman realized that his table had been swapped, and he was ashamed to stand there like a liar. But the relatives laughed at him and had to return home without eating or drinking. The father brought out his scraps again and resumed tailoring, while the son found work with another master. The second son had come to a miller and apprenticed with him. When his years were up, the master said, "Since you have done so well, I will give you a donkey of a special kind. He does not pull carts or carry sacks." "What use is he then?" asked the young journeyman. "He spits out gold," replied the miller. "If you stand him on a cloth and say, 'Bricklebrit,' the good animal will spit out gold coins from front and back." "That is a fine thing," said the journeyman, thanked the master, and went out into the world. Whenever he needed gold, he only needed to say "Bricklebrit" to his donkey, and gold coins rained down, and he had no trouble picking them up from the ground. Wherever he went, the best was good enough for him, and the more expensive, the dearer, because he always had a full purse. After seeing the world for some time, he thought, "You must find your father. If you come with the gold donkey, he will forget his anger and welcome you warmly." It so happened that he returned to the same inn where his brother's table had been swapped. He led his donkey by the hand, and the innkeeper wanted to take the animal from him and tie it up, but the young journeyman said, "Do not bother. I will lead my gray horse to the stable and tie him up myself, for I must know where he stands." The innkeeper thought this strange and believed someone who had to look after his donkey himself would not have much to spend. But when the stranger reached into his pocket, took out 2 gold coins, and said he should buy something good for him, the innkeeper made large eyes, ran, and sought the best he could find. After the meal, the guest asked what he owed, and the innkeeper spared no expense, saying he would need to add a couple more gold coins. The journeyman reached into his pocket, but his gold had run out. "Wait a moment, Mr. Innkeeper," he said. "I will just go and get gold," but took the tablecloth with him. The innkeeper did not know what this meant, was curious, followed him, and since the guest locked the stable door, peered through a knothole. The stranger spread the cloth under the donkey, called Bricklebrit, and immediately the animal began to spit out gold from front and back, raining down to the ground properly. "Well, well," said the innkeeper, "there the ducats are soon minted. Such a purse is not bad." The guest paid his bill and went to sleep, but in the night the innkeeper sneaked down into the stable, took away the coinmaster, and tied another donkey in its place. The following morning, early in the morning, the journeyman left with his donkey, thinking he had his gold donkey. At noon, he arrived at his father's, who was glad to see him again and welcomed him warmly. "What have you become, my son?" asked the old man. "A miller, dear father," he replied. "What have you brought back from your travels?" "Nothing more than a donkey." "There are plenty of donkeys here," said the father. "I would have preferred a good goat." "Yes," replied the son, "but it is not an ordinary donkey, but a gold donkey. When I say Bricklebrit, the good animal spits out a whole cloth full of gold coins. Invite all relatives, I will make them all rich." "I like that," said the tailor. "Then I won't have to struggle with the needle any more," jumped up himself, and called the relatives together. Once they were gathered, the miller made space, spread his cloth, and brought the donkey into the room. "Now pay attention," he said, and called Bricklebrit. But no gold coins fell, and it became clear that the animal did not understand the art, because not every donkey can do that. The poor miller made a long face, saw that he had been cheated, and begged the relatives' forgiveness, who went home as poor as they had come. Nothing remained. The old man had to pick up his scraps again, and the young man went to work with a miller. The third brother had apprenticed to a turner, and because it was a craft that required skill, he had to learn for the longest time. His brothers had sent him a letter describing how badly they had been treated, and how the innkeeper had cheated them out of their wonderful objects. When the turner had completed his apprenticeship and was ready to journey forth, his master gave him a sack, saying, "There's a stick inside. I can carry the sack around, and it can be useful to me. But what's the stick for?" "It just makes it heavier," replied the apprentice. "I'll tell you," answered the master. "If someone has wronged you, just say 'stick' out of the sack, and the stick will leap out among the people and dance so merrily on their backs that they won't be able to move or stir for 8 days, and it won't stop until you say 'stick' into the sack." The apprentice thanked him, hung the sack over his shoulder, and whenever someone came too close and wanted to harm him, he would say, "Stick, out of the sack." Immediately, the stick would spring out and smack the coat or doublet of each one on the back without waiting for them to take it off. And it happened so quickly that before anyone knew it, it was already their turn. The young turner arrived at the inn in the evening, where his brothers had been cheated. He placed his knapsack on the table in front of him and began to tell about all the remarkable things he had seen in the world. "Yes," he said, "one may find a table that sets itself, a golden donkey, and the like, nothing but good things, which I do not despise. But all that is nothing compared to the treasure I have acquired and carry with me in my sack." The innkeeper pricked up his ears. "What in the world could that be?" he thought. "The sack is probably filled with nothing but precious stones. I should rightfully have that too, because all good things come in threes." When bedtime came, the guest stretched out on the bench and used his sack as a pillow. The innkeeper, thinking the guest was sound asleep, approached and gently and carefully tried to pull the sack away to replace it with another. However, the turner had been waiting for this moment. Just as the innkeeper was about to give a hearty tug, he called out, "Stick out of the sack." Immediately, the little stick sprang out onto the innkeeper's body and rubbed him so sorely that it was quite something. The innkeeper cried out for mercy, but the louder he screamed, the more vigorously the stick beat time on his back until he finally fell exhausted to the ground. Then the turner said, "If you don't return the self-setting table and the golden donkey to me, this dance will start all over again." "Oh no," cried the innkeeper in a very subdued voice. "I will gladly return everything. Just let the cursed imp crawl back into the sack." So the apprentice said, "I will grant mercy for justice's sake, but beware of mischief." Then he called, "Stick into the sack," and let it rest. The next morning, the turner returned home with the self-setting table and the golden donkey. The tailor was overjoyed to see him again, and asked him what he had learned abroad. "Dear father," he replied, "I have become a turner." "A craft requiring skill," said the father. "What have you brought back from your travels?" "A precious piece, dear father," answered the son, "a stick in the sack." "What?" exclaimed the father. "A stick! That's worth the effort. You can cut one from any tree." "But not one like this, dear father," replied the son. "If I say stick out of the sack, the stick leaps out and gives a bad actor a terrible dance, not stopping until they lie on the ground, begging for mercy. You see, with this stick, I managed to bring back the self-setting table and the golden donkey that the thieving innkeeper took from my brothers. Now, let's call them both and invite all our relatives. I will feast and wine them and fill their pockets with gold." The old tailor was still somewhat doubtful, but gathered the relatives nonetheless. The turner spread a cloth in the room, brought in the golden donkey, and said to his brother, "Now, dear brother, speak to it." The miller said, "Brickle-brit," and immediately the gold coins rained down onto the cloth like a cloudburst, and the donkey did not stop until everyone had so much that they could carry no more. I can tell you would have liked to have been there too. Then the turner brought out the self-setting table and said, "Dear brother, now speak to it." And as soon as the carpenter said, "Table, set yourself," it was set and abundantly supplied with the most beautiful dishes. A feast was held like the good tailor had never experienced in his home, and the entire extended family stayed together until late into the night, all happy and content. The tailor locked away needle and thread, yardstick and iron in a cupboard, and lived with his 3 sons in joy and splendor. But where did the goat, which caused the tailor to drive away his 3 sons, disappear to? I'll tell you. She was ashamed that she had a bald head, ran into a fox's den, and hid there. When the fox returned home, a pair of large eyes glinted at him from the darkness, startling him, and he ran back out again. He met the bear, and since the fox looked so disturbed, he said, "What's the matter, brother fox? What kind of face are you making?" "Oh," replied the red one, "a fierce creature is sitting in my den, glaring at me with fiery eyes." "We'll soon drive that out," said the bear, went to the den, and looked inside. But when he saw the fiery eyes, fear overcame him as well. He wanted nothing to do with the fierce creature and took off. The bee met him, and noticing that he was not feeling well, she said, "Bear, you are making quite a sour face. Where has your cheerfulness gone?" "You have it easy," replied the bear. "There is a fierce creature with glowing eyes in the fox's house, and we cannot drive it out." The bee said, "I pity you, bear. I am a poor, but weak creature that you do not look at in the way of path, but I still think that I can help you." She flew into the fox's den, sat on the goat's smooth-shaven head, and stung her so violently that she jumped up, "Meh," screamed, and ran madly into the world. And to this day, no one knows where she ran off to. There was once a poor farmer who would sit by the hearth every evening, tending the fire, while his wife spun wool. One evening he said, "How sad it is that we have no children. Our home is so quiet, unlike the lively, cheerful homes of others." "Yes," replied his wife with a sigh. "If we could have even one child, even if it were no bigger than a thumb, I would be happy. We would love it dearly." In due course, the wife became ill and after 7 months gave birth to a child who was perfectly formed in every way, but no larger than a thumb. They said, "He is just what we wished for, and he will be our beloved child." And they named him Tom Thumb because of his size. Despite giving him ample nourishment, the child did not grow any bigger and remained the same size as when he was born. Nevertheless, he had a sharp mind and soon proved himself to be clever and agile, succeeding in everything he attempted. One day, The farmer prepared to go into the forest to cut wood and mused aloud, "I wish someone could bring the cart to meet me." "Oh, father," cried Tom Thumb, "I can bring the cart. Trust me, it will be in the forest on time." The farmer laughed and said, "How will you manage that? You're far too small to hold the reins." "That doesn't matter, father. If mother will harness the horse, I will sit in its ear and tell it where to go." "Well," replied the father, "let's try it once." When the time came, the mother harnessed the horse and placed Tom Thumb in its ear. The little boy then directed the horse, calling out, "Gee up! Gee whoa! Hup! Whoa!" The horse moved along as if a master was guiding it, and the cart took the correct path to the forest. As they turned a corner and Tom Thumb called, "Hup! Whoa!" two strangers happened to pass by. "What is this?" one exclaimed. "A cart is moving along, and the driver is shouting commands, but he is nowhere to be seen." "This doesn't seem right," said the other. "Let's follow the cart and see where it goes." The cart continued into the forest and arrived at the spot where the wood was being cut. When Tom Thumb saw his father, he called out, "Look, father, here I am with the cart. Now, lift me down." The father held the horse with one hand, and with the other, he took his little son from the horse's ear. Tom Thumb sat contentedly on a straw, delighted with his success. When the two strangers saw Tom Thumb, they were speechless with astonishment. One of them pulled the other aside and whispered, "Listen, this little fellow could make our fortune if we showed him off in a big city. Let's buy him." They approached the farmer and said, "Sell us the little man. He will have a good life with us." "No," answered the father. "He is the apple of my eye, and I wouldn't sell him for all the gold in the world." But Tom Thumb, having overheard their conversation, climbed up his father's coat, perched on his shoulder, and whispered in his ear, "Father, let me go with them. I'll come back soon." So, for a handsome sum of money, the father sold Tom Thumb to the two men. "Where do you want to sit?" they asked him. "Oh, just put me on the brim of your hat. That way I can walk around and see the countryside without the risk of falling off." They did as he requested, and after Tom Thumb had bid his father farewell, they set off with him. They traveled until dusk, and then Tom Thumb said, "Please set me down. I need a break." "Stay up there," said the man whose hat he was on. "I don't mind. Birds sometimes drop things on me." "No," said Tom Thumb. "I know what's proper. Please put me down quickly." The man took off his hat and set Tom Thumb on a field by the roadside. The little boy hopped and crawled about for a while, and then suddenly slipped into a mouse hole he had spotted. "Good evening, gentlemen. You can go home without me," he called to them, laughing. They ran over and poked their sticks into the mouse hole, but it was in vain. Tom Thumb crept deeper inside, and as it was getting dark, the men had to return home in frustration, their pockets empty. When Tom Thumb realized that the thieves had gone, he crawled out of the underground passage. "It's so dangerous to walk across the field in the dark," he said. "How easily one could break a neck or a leg." Fortunately, he bumped into an empty snail shell. "Thank goodness," he said. "This will be a safe place to spend the night," and he settled inside it. He had just started to doze off when he heard two men passing by. One of them was saying, "How shall we go about stealing the rich pastor's money and silver?" "I can tell you how," Tom Thumb called out from the shell. "What was that?" said one of the thieves, startled. "I heard someone speak." They stopped and listened intently. "Take me with you and I'll help you," Tom Thumb called again. "Where are you?" "Look down at the ground and follow the sound of my voice," he replied. Finally, the thieves found him and lifted him up. "You little wretch, how can you help us?" they asked. "See," he answered, "I can crawl between the iron bars into the pastor's room and hand out to you whatever you want." "Well," they said, "we'll see what you can do." When they reached the pastor's house, Tom Thumb squeezed into the room, but he immediately yelled at the top of his lungs, "Do you want everything that's here?" The thieves were terrified and whispered, "Speak softly so no one wakes up." But Tom Thumb pretended not to hear them and shouted again, "What do you want? Do you want everything that's here?" The cook, who was sleeping in a nearby room, heard this and sat up in bed to listen. The thieves, now quite scared, had run a little way off, but they finally regained their courage and thought, "The little guy is trying to trick us." They came back and whispered, "Now be serious and hand us something out." Tom Thumb shouted even louder, I'll give you everything. Just reach in your hands." The listening maid heard him clearly. She jumped out of bed and rushed to the door. The thieves fled as if a wild hunter were after them. The maid, not finding anything unusual, went to fetch a light. When she returned with it, Tom Thumb sneaked out of the house and into the barn without being seen. After searching every corner and finding nothing, the maid finally went back to bed, thinking she had just been dreaming with her eyes and ears wide open. Tom Thumb had climbed into the hay and found a cozy spot to sleep. He planned to rest until morning and then go back home to his parents. But he had to endure more trials. Indeed, there is much trouble and hardship in the world. At dawn, the maid got up to feed the cattle. Her first stop was the barn, where she grabbed an armful of hay, which, unfortunately, included the very hay where poor Tom Thumb was sleeping. He was so sound asleep that he didn't wake up until he was inside the cow's mouth, which had scooped him up with the hay. "Oh, God," he exclaimed. "How did I end up in the millstone?" But soon he realized where he was. He had to be careful not to get crushed by the cow's teeth and eventually slid down into its stomach. "The windows in this little room were forgotten," he said. "No sunlight shines in, and no candle is brought here." Overall, he didn't like his new quarters at all. And what was worse, more and more hay kept coming in, making the space tighter. Finally, in his desperation, he shouted as loud as he could, "No more fresh food! No more fresh food!" The maid was milking the cow at that moment. Hearing the voice but seeing no one, and recognizing it as the same voice from the night before, she was so frightened that she slipped off her stool and spilled the milk. She ran in a panic to her master, crying, "Oh my God, Pastor, the cow is talking!" "You must be mad," the pastor replied, but he decided to go and see what was happening. As soon as he stepped into the barn, Tom Thumb called out again, "No more fresh food! No more fresh food!" The pastor was equally frightened, thinking an evil spirit had possessed the cow and ordered it to be slaughtered. The cow was killed, and its stomach, with Tom Thumb inside, was thrown onto the dung heap. Tom Thumb had to work hard to make his way out, but he managed to wriggle enough to get some room. Just as he was about to poke his head out, a new disaster struck. A hungry wolf ran by and gulped down the whole stomach in one swallow. But Tom Thumb didn't lose heart. "Maybe," he thought, "I can negotiate with the wolf," and he called out from inside its belly, "Dear wolf, I know where you can find a splendid feast." "Where?" asked the wolf. "In such and such a house. You must crawl in through the drain, and you'll find cakes, bacon, and sausages, all you can eat." He described his father's house in detail. The wolf didn't need to be told twice. That night, it squeezed through the drain and into the pantry, where it gorged itself to its heart's content. When it was full and wanted to leave, it was too fat to fit back through the drain. This was exactly what Tom Thumb had counted on, and he began to make a tremendous racket inside the wolf's belly, thrashing and shouting as loud as he could. "Be quiet," said the wolf. "You'll wake the people up." "Nonsense," replied the little one. "You've had your fill. Now I want to have some fun." And he began to scream again with all his might. Finally, his father and mother were awakened. They ran to the pantry and peeked in through the crack. Seeing the wolf inside, they ran for help. The man fetched his axe, and the woman grabbed a scythe. "Stay back," said the man as they entered the room. "When I've given him a blow and he's still not dead, you must strike him with the scythe and cut him open." Tom Thumb heard his father's voice and cried out, "Dear father, I'm here. I'm inside the wolf." Overjoyed, the father exclaimed, "Thank God, our dear child has been found." He told his wife to put the scythe away to avoid harming Tom Thumb. Then he swung the axe and delivered a blow to the wolf's head, killing it instantly. They quickly fetched a knife and scissors, cut the wolf open, and pulled out their little son. "Oh," said the father, "what anxiety we have endured for your sake." "Yes, father, I have traveled far and wide in the world. Thank goodness I can breathe fresh air again." "Where have you been?" asked his father. "Oh, father, I've been in a mouse hole, in a cow's stomach, and in a wolf's belly. Now I'll stay with you." "And we won't sell you again for all the riches in the world," said his parents as they hugged and kissed their dear Tom Thumb. They gave him food and drink and had new clothes made for him because his old ones had been ruined on his journey. The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. Once upon a time, there was an old fox with 9 tails who believed his wife was not faithful and wanted to test her. He stretched himself under the bench, didn't move a limb, and pretended to be as dead as a doornail. Mrs. Fox went up to her chamber, locked herself in, and her maid, Miss Cat, sat by the hearth and cooked. When it became known that the old fox had died, suitors began to appear. The maid heard someone knocking at the house door. She went and opened it, and there stood a young fox who said, "What are you doing, Miss Cat? Are you asleep or awake?" She answered, "I'm not sleeping, I'm awake. Would you like to know what I make? I'm boiling warm beer, adding butter so nice. Would the gentleman care to have a slice?" "No, thank you, miss," said the fox. "What is Mrs. Fox doing?" The maid replied, "She sits in her chamber high, bemoaning her loss, a tear in her eye, weeping her little eyes so red, because the old Mr. Fox is dead." "Tell her, miss, there's a young fox here who wishes to court her." "Certainly, young sir." Then the cat went tripping up the stairs, tap, 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 knocking on the door, rap, rap, rap. "Mrs. Fox, are you inside?" "Oh, yes, my dear," she cried. "A suitor waits at our door." "My dear, what's he like, I implore? But does he have 9 as lovely tails as our late Mr. Fox?" "Oh, no," replied the cat, "he has only 1." "Then I'll not have him." Miss Cat went downstairs and sent the suitor away. Soon after, there was another knock, and another fox was at the door who wanted to court Mrs. Fox, he 2 tails, but fared no better than the first. After him came others, each with 1 more tail than the last, all of whom were turned away, until finally one arrived with 9 tails, like old Mr. Fox. Upon hearing this, the widow joyfully said to the cat, "Now open wide the gate and door, and carry old Mr. Fox outside." But just as the wedding was about to be solemnized, old Mr. Fox stirred under the bench, thrashed the whole lot, and chased them and Mrs. Fox out of the house. Second story. When old Mr. Fox had passed away, the wolf arrived as a suitor, knocked at the door, and Mrs. Fox's servant, the cat, opened it for him. The wolf greeted her and said, "Good day, Mrs. Cat of Carrowit. Why are you sitting here alone? I see fit. What are you cooking there so nice?" The cat replied, "I'm breaking bread and milk to please. Would the gentleman care to have some if you please?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Cat," answered the wolf. "Is Mrs. Fox not at home?" The cat said, "She's sitting in her room above, bemoaning her loss with love, bemoaning her sorrow so sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more. If she's in need of a husband now, would she step down below?" The cat swiftly ran up the stair, with her tail flying without a care, until she reached the door of the hall. She knocked with her 5 golden rings. "Mrs. Fox, are you within? If you're in need of a husband, let us begin." Mrs. Fox asked, "Does the gentleman wear red stockings and have a pointed mouth?" "No," replied the cat. "Then he won't do for me." When the wolf was turned away, a dog, a stag, a hare, a lion, and all the beasts of the forest came one after the other. But each lacked one of the good qualities old Mr. Fox had possessed, and the cat had to send each suitor away. Finally, a young fox arrived. Mrs. Fox asked, "Does the gentleman wear red stockings and have a little pointed mouth?" "Yes," said the cat, "he does." "Then let him come upstairs," said Mrs. Fox, and ordered the servant to prepare the wedding feast. "Sweep the room as clean as you may. Open the window. Toss my old man away. For many a fine, fat mouse he brought, yet of his wife he never thought, but ate up every one he caught." Then the wedding was held with young Mr. Fox, and there was rejoicing and dancing, and if they haven't stopped, they're dancing still. 39. The Elves' First Story. Once upon a time, there was a shoemaker who had become so poor, through no fault of his own, that he had only enough leather left for 1 pair of shoes. One evening, he cut out the shoes, intending to begin working on them the next morning. Having a clear conscience, he went to bed peacefully, entrusted himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after saying his prayers, he was about to sit down to work when he saw the 2 shoes already finished on his table. Astonished, he didn't know what to make of it. He picked up the shoes to examine them more closely. They were so perfectly made that there wasn't a single bad stitch in them, as if they were meant to be a masterpiece. Soon after, a buyer entered, and since he was so pleased with the shoes, he paid more than usual for them. With this money, the shoemaker was able to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. That evening, he cut them out and planned to start fresh the next morning, but there was no need. When he got up, the shoes were already finished, and buyers came who paid him enough to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. This continued every morning. What he had cut out the night before was finished by the morning. Soon, he regained his honest livelihood and eventually became a prosperous man. One evening, not long before Christmas, the shoemaker had cut out the leather as usual. Before going to bed, he said to his wife, "How about we stay up tonight to see who is lending us such a helping hand?" His wife agreed and lit a candle. Then they hid in a corner of the room, behind some clothes that were hanging there, and watched. At midnight, 2 tiny, cute, naked little men came in, sat at the shoemaker's table, and began to stitch, sew, and hammer with their little fingers so quickly and skillfully that the shoemaker couldn't take his eyes off them in astonishment. They worked steadily until everything was finished and the shoes stood complete on the table. Then they ran away swiftly. The next morning, the wife said, "The little men have made us rich, and we must show our gratitude. They run around so much and have nothing to wear and must be cold. Here's what we'll do. I'll sew little shirts, coats, vests, and trousers for them, and knit each a pair of stockings. You make each a pair of shoes." The man agreed. That evening, when everything was ready, they laid the presents on the table instead of the cut-out work, and then hid to see how the little men would react. At midnight, they came in, wanting to get to work immediately. But when they found only the delightful little clothes instead of the leather, they were at first astonished. Then they showed immense delight. With great speed, they dressed themselves in the beautiful clothes and sang, "We are boys so fine to see. Why should we longer cobblers be?" Then they skipped and danced and leapt over chairs and benches. Finally, they danced out the door. From that time on, they never returned, but the shoemaker prospered in all his undertakings for the rest of his life. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl who was very diligent and tidy. Every day, she would sweep the house and dump the sweepings on a big heap in front of the door. One morning, just as she was about to return to work, she found a letter on the heap. As she couldn't read, she put her broom in the corner and took the letter to her master and mistress. The letter was an invitation from the elves, asking the girl to be the godmother at a child's christening. The girl didn't know what to do, but after much persuasion, and because she was told it was not right to refuse such an invitation, she agreed. 3 elves came and led her to a hollow mountain where the little folk lived. Everything there was small but incredibly elegant and beautiful. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony adorned with pearl buttons, the blankets were embroidered with gold, the cradle was made of ivory, and the bath was of gold. The girl stood as the godmother and then wanted to go home. However, the little elves begged her to stay for 3 days with them. She stayed and spent the time in joy and pleasure, with the little folk doing everything to make her happy. Finally, she decided to return home. Before she left, they filled her pockets with gold and then led her out of the mountain. When she got home, she wanted to start her work and took the broom, which was still standing in the corner, and began to sweep. To her surprise, strangers came out of the house, asking who she was and what she was doing there. It turned out that she hadn't been with the little men for just 3 days, as she thought, but for 7 years, and in that time, her former masters had died. Third story. A mother had her child taken from the cradle by the elves, and in its place they left a changeling with a large head and staring eyes, who did nothing but eat and drink. In her distress, she went to her neighbor and asked for advice. The neighbor suggested that she should take the changeling into the kitchen, set it on the hearth, light a fire, and boil some water in 2 eggshells. This, the neighbor said, would make the changeling laugh, and once he laughed, it would all be over. The woman followed the advice. As she put the eggshells with water over the fire, the changeling said, "I am as old as the Wester Forest, yet never have I seen anyone cook in shells." And he began to laugh. As soon as he laughed, a host of little elves suddenly appeared, bringing the real child back. They set the child on the hearth and took the changeling away with them. The Robber Bridegroom, a fairy tale by the Brothers Grimm. Once upon a time, there was a miller who had a beautiful daughter. When she grew up, her father wished that she would be well cared for and married off respectably. He thought, if a decent suitor comes along and asks for her, I will give her to him." Not long after, a suitor appeared who seemed very wealthy, and since the miller had no objections to him, he promised his daughter to this man. However, the girl did not love him as a bride should love her groom. She had no trust in him, and every time she looked at him or thought about him, a cold shiver ran through her heart. One day, the groom said to her, "You are my bride, but you never come to visit me." The girl answered, "I don't know where your house is." Then the groom said, "My house is deep in the dark forest." She tried to make excuses, saying she couldn't find the way, but the groom insisted, "Next Sunday, you must come to visit me. I have already invited guests, and to make sure you find the way through the forest, I will sprinkle ashes on the path." When Sunday came and the girl was supposed to set out, she felt a great fear, though she didn't know why. To mark the way, she filled her pockets with peas and lentils. At the entrance of the forest, ashes were scattered, and she followed the path, but with each step she tossed a few peas on the ground to the left and right. She walked nearly the entire day until she reached the middle of the forest, where it was the darkest. There stood a lonely house that she did not like, for it looked grim and eerie. She entered, but there was no one inside, and the silence was overwhelming. Suddenly, a voice cried out, "Turn back! Turn back, you pretty bride! You are in a murderer's house inside." The girl looked up and saw that the voice came from a bird hanging in a cage on the wall. Again, the bird cried, "Turn back! Turn back, you pretty bride! You are in a murderer's house inside." The beautiful bride continued walking through the house, moving from one room to another, but each room was empty, and no one was to be found. Finally, she reached the cellar, where a very old woman sat nodding her head. "Can you tell me," the girl asked, "if my bridegroom lives here?" "Oh, poor child," the old woman replied. "Do you know where you have ended up? You are in a den of robbers. You think you are a bride about to be married, but you are in great danger. I have put a big kettle of water on the boil. When they have you in their power, they will harm you. If I don't take pity on you and save you, you are lost." The old woman hid her behind a large barrel where she could not be seen. "Be as quiet as a mouse," she said. "Do not move or you are lost. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape. I have been waiting a long time for such an opportunity." No sooner had this been arranged than the gang of wicked men returned. They brought another young woman with them and did not heed her cries. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, one of white wine, one of red, and one of yellow. The poor bride behind the barrel trembled, seeing what fate awaited her. One of the robbers noticed a gold ring on the little finger of their captive. He tried to remove it, but couldn't, so he took an axe and chopped off the finger. The finger sprang into the air, flew over the barrel, and landed right in the bride's lap. The robber took a light to search for it, but could not find it. Then another said, "Have you looked behind the big barrel?" But the old woman interrupted, "Come and eat. Leave the search for tomorrow. The finger won't run away." The robbers agreed, saying the old woman was right, and they stopped searching. They sat down to eat, and the old woman poured a sleeping potion into their wine. Soon, they lay on the cellar floor, sleeping and snoring. When the bride heard this, she crept from behind the barrel and had to step carefully among the sleepers lying all around on the ground, terrified that she might wake one of them. But with great fortune, she passed through safely, and the old woman accompanied her out. They opened the door and fled as fast as they could from that house of danger. The wind had blown away the ashes from the path, but the peas and lentils had sprouted and showed the way in the moonlight. They walked through the night and by morning reached the mill. The girl told her father everything that had happened. On the day the wedding was to take place, the bridegroom appeared, but the miller had invited all his relatives and friends. As they sat at the table, each person was to tell a story. The bride sat silently and said nothing. Then the groom asked her, "Now, my love, do you not know any story? Tell us something." She answered, "I will tell you a dream. I was walking alone through a forest and finally came to a house. There was no one inside, but on the wall was a bird in a cage, which cried, turn back, you pretty bride. You are in a murderer's house inside." And it repeated the warning. My dear, it was only a dream. I went through all the rooms, and they were all empty and so eerie. Eventually, I went down into the cellar, where a very old woman sat nodding her head. I asked her, "Does my bridegroom live in this house?" She answered, "Oh, poor child, you have come into a den of robbers. Your bridegroom lives here, but he plans to harm you." My dear, it was only a dream. The old woman then hid me behind a large barrel. No sooner was I hidden than the robbers returned, bringing a young woman with them. They gave her 3 kinds of wine to drink: white, red, and yellow. My dear, it was only a dream. Then they took her fine clothes and did her harm. My dear, it was only a dream. One of the robbers saw that there was still a ring on her finger, and because it was hard to remove, he took an axe and chopped it off. But the finger sprang into the air and landed behind the large barrel in my lap. And here's the finger with the ring. As she spoke these words, she pulled out the finger and showed it to the guests. The robber, who had grown deathly pale during the story, jumped up and tried to escape, but the guests seized him and handed him over to the authorities. He and his entire gang were tried for their wicked deeds and brought to justice.